I'm redeploying nearly 1,000 members of the New York State Police, MTA Police, and MTA National Guard to conduct bag checks.
What happens if you don't want your bag searched?
Then go home. We're not going to search you. You can say no, but you're not taking the subway.
I mean, they are deploying 1,000 National Guard, but this right here looks made for television. The governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, announced today that crime has gotten so bad in the Empire State that she is calling out the National Guard. It's that big of an emergency. Here she is.
Point one. I'm redeploying nearly 1,000 members of the New York State Police, MTA Police, and MTA National Guard to conduct bag checks in the city's busiest transits. They'll start seeing them at the tables, making sure that weapons are not being brought in, working in concert with our New York State Police, as well as our NYPD. Because no one heading to their job or to visit family or to go to a doctor appointment should worry that the person sitting next to them possesses a deadly weapon. Point one.
So, why she really evokes confidence too, doesn't she? If you live in New York right now, I'm sure you feel a lot safer and a lot more sound knowing that she's got her steady hands at the wheel. She was literally unable to read. What is with Democrats? Joe Biden can't read either. Is there a literacy problem with our Democrat elected officials? And sure enough, it's already been implemented. Here is the scene in New York City subways this morning as people were heading to work. You've got police directing subway riders over. There's the National Guard with weapons of war, I'm told, by the left. There's the National Guard standing by as bags are being searched for weapons. By the way, if you're carrying a weapon onto the subway in your bag and you plan on mugging people or harming people and you head down the escalator, I did real fast. I'm going to finish my thought, but what a nice guy that he brought his wife's purse over there. I was going to say, why is this guy carrying a purse? Did you see that? See, chivalry is not dead. That I don't know why. That's very wholesome. I thought, oh, here's a guy with a purse. But no, he carried his wife's purse for her. We need more of that. This is that guy for mayor. If you're carrying a bag down to the subway and you plan on using a knife or a gun to assault someone or mug them on the train and you come down the escalator and you see they're checking bags, what do you do? I'm thinking you like immediately just turn around and go right up the escalator. That's the guy the cops should be handling, right? That's the guy you get. Now, I don't know if they're still doing it. Something tells me that this is all for show, that they're doing this because the cameras are there to make people think that something's happening. I cannot believe, knowing New York, I've lived there. Have you ever lived in New York? Do you know how many subway stations there are throughout all 5 boroughs? Well, 4 boroughs. There's no subway stations going to Staten Island. I've got to believe that they can't be doing this at every subway stop. It can't be. I mean, they are deploying 1,000 National Guard, but this right here looks made for television. Grand Central, of course. They're doing it where there's a lot of people, and it's right across the street from a bunch of television stations and networks. And they're trying to convey the message that they've got things under control. But see, here's what I don't understand. Tonight, Joe Biden isn't going to say anything about violent crime on our streets. In fact, in New York City, the DA there, his name is Alvin Bragg, and he's Joe Biden's buddy. Alvin Bragg is spending millions of dollars of city resources to prosecute Donald Trump for God knows what. I've forgotten at this point. Entering into a non-disclosure agreement with somebody. So if things are that great in New York that you can spend millions of dollars to prosecute Donald Trump, or in the state of New York where Letitia James just prosecuted Donald Trump in a civil case, clearly, since that's the priority, they've got no problem with crime. And Joe Biden tonight he's not going to say anything about violent crime in the streets because there's no issue. There's no problem. So if that's the case, why does Governor Hochul have to call out 1,000 National Guardsmen to help bring law and order to the streets of that fair city? By the way, real quickly here, editorial in, I believe, the New York Times. Mara Gay, she's the one who the other day said that the Supreme Court was standing with the Confederacy for allowing Donald Trump to be on the ballot in Colorado. You remember her, right? Mara Gay. But even she, as an editorial board member, wrote a column in the New York Times applauding Democrat Governor Kathy Hochul for calling in the National Guard. The National Guard might help subway riders feel safer. And by the way, that's actually incredibly accurate because this has nothing to do with actually doing anything. It's to make people feel good. That's why they're doing it. New York City can't function without a thriving subway, and ensuring that the system not only is safe, but feels safe is paramount. See, it's got to feel safe. Well, gee, Mara, why does it not feel safe? Maybe it doesn't feel safe because it isn't safe. Because we've seen over and over and over again people getting beat up and pushed onto the tracks and knifed and aggressive panhandlers going through the subway demanding money from people. It used to be like that when I lived in New York until one thing happened. They elected Rudy Giuliani and he said, no more. Screw it. He didn't have to call in the National Guard. He just let the police do their job. But there's something really interesting about seeing the New York Times have a headline that says the National Guard might help subway riders feel safer. Because 2 years ago, when there was rampant crime in New York, someone else suggested that the National Guard might help fix the problem. Tom Cotton wrote an opinion piece, as you can see. Send in the troops, the nation must restore order, the military stands ready. He suggested bringing in the National Guard to make America's city streets safer, including New York. Mara Gay, the same Mara Gay, commented on that and said, running this in the New York Times puts Black people in danger and other Americans standing up for our humanity and democracy. And then tagged her employer, the New York Times, on her tweet. Does this sound familiar to you? It was a really big controversy in June of 2020 after a month of Black Lives Matter riots and protests and arson and looting and death. When Tom Cotton said, enough. Chicago and New York and Philadelphia and DC and LA and San Francisco, they have proven that their law enforcement cannot maintain law and order because the elected officials cannot maintain law and order and won't let the cops maintain law and order. So let's bring in the National Guard. And for running that column, there was an outright revolt at the New York Times. The writers, the opinion writers, the journalists, they all felt triggered by the fact that in their newspaper, they allowed Republican Tom Cotton to print this odious, horrible, racist mess. Tom Cotton, send in the troops. So there's Mara Gay, June of 2020, saying that running that from Tom Cotton puts people in danger, Black people in particular. And then here she is today. Same Mara Gay. The National Guard might help subway riders feel safer. Applauding Democrat Kathy Hochul's decision. Well, that just doesn't seem right, does it? The irony was not lost, by the way, on the aforementioned Senator Tom Cotton. He actually tweeted out the story about how the National Guard has been called in nearly 3 years after, 3.5 years after he suggested it in the New York Times. He tweeted out the New York Times article saying that the National Guard and state police are going to patrol New York City subways. And he merely said, sending in the troops to help restore law and order. That's a power move right there. Because let's remember, Tom Cotton's headline was "Send in the troops, the nation must restore law and order." By the way, at the New York Times, when this whole uproar happened, people lost their jobs. The executive editor had to resign because he had lost his staff, the writers, the reporters. They refused to work with him. The lunatics run the asylum at the New York Times. They were so angry that a sitting senator was allowed to express his opinion, an opinion, by the way, that they are now joining and publishing 3.5 years later. They were so outraged he was able to express his opinion in the New York Times that they demanded the executive editor or the managing editor be fired or step down and resign in disgrace. And they won. He did. He was drummed out of his job because they don't believe in freedom of the press. They don't believe in free speech. They're authoritarians. They only believe that one opinion is allowed. And by the way, they may even share that opinion 3 years later, but if they have the opinion, then it's okay. But if you have the opinion, or someone like you, or someone you elected has that opinion, well, no, that harms Black people. By the way, while we're at it, and while we're issuing apologies now, or we should be issuing apologies to Tom Cotton and anyone who stood by him for believing that maybe the National Guard should be brought in to make people feel safer in New York City subways, how about this guy? How about Daniel Penny? Daniel Penny, a Marine veteran who, as a good Samaritan while sitting on the subway, helped subdue a lunatic, a violent, crazed lunatic. And in subduing him, that lunatic who was threatening harm to innocent individuals on that train, that lunatic happened to die. And now Daniel Penny is facing manslaughter charges because he stepped up and did what no one else on the train would do, which is protect innocent lives, because he's a Marine. He's under arrest. He's facing manslaughter charges. And now Kathy Hochul, the governor, has brought out the National Guard in full military fatigues and carrying their rifles to keep law and order on the subways. Daniel Penny didn't have a weapon. Daniel Penny wasn't dressed in military garb. Daniel Penny was minding his own business, wanting to go to work. And then a lunatic came in, started threatening his fellow passengers, and he helped protect them. If we're issuing apologies, and we certainly should, let's save one. As Shane Murphy says here on X, let's save one of our apologies for Daniel Penny, and let's pray to God he gets acquitted. Even better, let's pray to God that the charges are dropped against him.